With a mischievous grin, Millionaire CEO Parker Hamilton proposes to Elise Warner, a radiant, blonde food researcher, after her bold attempt to sabotage a blind date, igniting a whirlwind of deception and desire. Their colliding worlds, woven with corporate intrigue and unspoken love, unfold a captivating tale of chaos and connection. Before you dive in, share your city and rate this romantic journey from 0 to 10 in the comments. Elise Warner adjusted her oversized sunglasses and tugged at the hem of her borrowed, skin-tight red dress, which clung to her like a second skin. The Manhattan evening buzzed around her, taxis honking, heels clicking on pavement, and the faint hum of anticipation in the air. She stood outside Le Jardin, an upscale restaurant with chandeliers glinting through its floor-to-ceiling windows, her blonde curls cascading over her shoulders. Her mission was clear: sabotage this blind date for her best friend, Sophia Bennett, a heiress who'd rather scroll through her phone than entertain another suitor, handpicked by her overbearing parents. Elise, a food research scientist with a penchant for chaos, had agreed to the scheme for a quick $500 and the thrill of playing a part. "Make him run for the hills," Sophia had pleaded, tossing her a designer bag and a wad of cash. Elise smirked, ready to deliver. Inside, the restaurant exuded wealth: marble floors, velvet chairs, and waiters gliding like ghosts. Elise's heels wobbled slightly as she crossed the threshold, her heart pounding not from nerves, but from the adrenaline of deception. She'd crafted her persona carefully, a ditzy, shopaholic gold digger who'd make any sensible man recoil. As the hostess led her to a private table tucked in a candlelit corner, Elise scanned the room. Her target was unmistakable. Parker Hamilton sat with an air of effortless command, his tailored navy suit accentuating his broad shoulders, his blonde hair catching the light like polished gold. His piercing blue eyes flicked up from his phone, locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. This was no ordinary CEO. This was trouble. "Miss Bennett?" he asked, standing with a smooth grace that belied the sharpness in his gaze. His voice was low, warm, but laced with a hint of amusement, as if he already sensed something was off. Elise flashed a dazzling smile, tossing her hair for effect. "That's me, Sophia Bennett, in the flesh." She extended a hand adorned with Sophia's gaudy diamond bracelet, letting it catch the light. "And you must be Parker Hamilton, the big-shot CEO. Wow, they weren't kidding about you." She giggled, high-pitched and deliberate, leaning forward to give him a view of the plunging neckline she'd protested wearing just hours ago. Parker's lips twitched, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he shook her hand, his grip firm and lingering just a second too long. "A pleasure," he said, gesturing to her seat. "I hope I live up to the hype." "Oh, you have no idea," Elise purred, sliding into the chair with exaggerated flair, crossing her legs so the dress rode up slightly. She launched into her act, chattering about her obsession with Fifth Avenue boutiques, dropping names of designers she'd only read about in Sophia's magazines. "I mean, who needs a savings account when you can have a new Birkin, right?" she said, twirling a lock of hair around her finger. Parker's expression remained unreadable, his eyes studying her like a puzzle he was determined to solve. The waiter arrived with a bottle of vintage Bordeaux, and Elise seized the opportunity to escalate. "Oh, wine. I'm more of a champagne girl. Dom Perignon, obviously. Only the best." She batted her lashes, leaning closer. "You know, I just love a man who can keep up with my tastes." Her voice dropped suggestively, and she traced a finger along the rim of her glass, waiting for him to squirm. Parker raised an eyebrow, sipping his wine without breaking eye contact. "Is that so?" he said, his tone maddeningly calm. "And what exactly are your tastes, Sophia?" Elise leaned in, her heart racing as she pushed the boundaries. "Oh, you know, fast cars, private jets, and men who don't waste time. She paused, letting her words hang in the air, then delivered the knockout blow. How about we skip dessert and head to a hotel? Somewhere fancy, like the Plaza. I'm sure you can afford it. She winked, expecting him to choke on his wine or bolt for the door. Instead, Parker set his glass down, his smile widening into something dangerously charming. The Plaza's nice, but I have a penthouse nearby, more private. His voice was velvet, but there was a glint in his eyes that sent a shiver down her spine. Unless you're not serious. Elise froze, her carefully constructed facade cracking. This wasn't part of the script. He was supposed to be appalled, not intrigued. I mean, wow, you move fast, she stammered, scrambling to regain control. She laughed, too loudly, drawing glances from nearby tables. But let's do it. I'm all about spontaneity. Parker leaned forward, his gaze pinning her in place. You're not what I expected, he said, his voice low and deliberate. But I like surprises. In fact, he reached into his jacket pocket, producing a small velvet box that made Elise's stomach lurch. He opened it to reveal a dazzling diamond ring, its facets catching the candlelight like a tiny constellation. Marry me, Sophia. The room seemed to tilt. Elise's mouth went dry, her pulse hammering in her ears. What? She managed, her voice barely a whisper. This was beyond sabotage. This was insanity. She'd expected rejection, not a proposal. Her mind raced for an escape. But Parker's eyes held hers, steady and unyielding, as if he could see through her charade. I know it's sudden, he continued, his tone softening but no less intense. But I've learned to trust my instincts. And you're different. Say yes. Elise's thoughts spun. She was supposed to be Sophia, the flighty heiress, not Elise Warner, the scientist who spent her days perfecting frozen meal recipes. She opened her mouth to deflect, to laugh it off, but the weight of his gaze stopped her. There was something genuine beneath his polished exterior, something that made her wonder what kind of man proposed to a stranger with such conviction. I need some air, she blurted, pushing back from the table. Her chair scraped against the floor, drawing more stares. She grabbed Sophia's designer bag, her hands trembling, and bolted for the exit, her heels clicking frantically. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a slap, grounding her. She leaned against the restaurant's brick wall, catching her breath. The image of that ring burned into her mind. Parker appeared moments later, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. You okay? He asked, his voice gentler now, devoid of the earlier bravado. Elise forced a smile, her heart still racing. Yeah, just overwhelmed. You don't propose to someone you just met, you know. She tried to sound flippant, but her voice wavered. Maybe not, Parker said, stepping closer, his presence filling the space between them. But I don't meet women like you every day. You're bold, unpredictable, real. He paused, searching her face. Unless you're not who you say you are. Her breath caught. He couldn't know. Could he? I'm Sophia, she lied, straightening. And I'm not the marrying type. Sorry to disappoint. Parker studied her for a long moment, then nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. We'll see about that, he said, turning back toward the restaurant. Good night, Sophia. As he disappeared inside, Elise sagged against the wall, her mind a whirlwind. She'd come to ruin a date, not to be proposed to by a man who saw through her act with unnerving clarity. Parker Hamilton was dangerous, not because of his wealth or power, but because he made her feel seen. And that, she realized, was the real threat. The morning after the disastrous blind date, Parker Hamilton stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor of Hamilton Foods' Manhattan headquarters. The city sprawled below, a chessboard of ambition and chaos. But his mind lingered on the blonde woman who'd fled Le Jardin with a designer bag and a lie. Sophia Bennett, he muttered, the name tasting false on his tongue. Her audacious act, part performance, part defiance, had sparked something in him, a flicker of intrigue he hadn't felt in years. But today, he had no time for mysteries. He was here to dismantle a legacy of complacency, starting with the rot within his family's empire. Parker had returned from London not as the dutiful heir, but as a reformer, determined to reshape Hamilton Foods into a global powerhouse. The company, built by his great-grandfather, had grown fat on its reputation, but beneath the glossy branding lurked inefficiencies and corruption. His grandfather, Chairman Charles Hamilton, clung to tradition, favoring loyalty over competence. Parker, however, saw the world differently. He'd spent years abroad, studying markets, honing strategies, and learning that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. As he adjusted his cufflinks, his reflection in the glass was resolute, a man ready to wage war on his legacy. The boardroom buzzed with tension as executives gathered for the appointment ceremony, a lavish affair Charles had orchestrated to cement Parker's return. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over mahogany tables, but Parker's absence was conspicuous. He'd instructed his secretary, Ethan Brooks, to deliver a brief statement. He was skipping the pomp to meet the real heartbeat of the company, the employees. Whispers rippled through the room, executives exchanging glances. Charles, seated at the head, gripped his cane, his weathered face darkening. "He's making a mockery of us," he muttered to his aide, his voice low but venomous. Parker's defiance wasn't just a snub, it was a declaration of independence. Downstairs, in the bustling research and development lab, Parker moved through rows of stainless steel counters, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. Scientists in white coats paused, startled by the CEO's unannounced presence. Elise Warner, still reeling from last night's fiasco, nearly dropped a test tube when she saw him. Her blonde curls were tucked under a hairnet, her face free of the garish makeup she'd worn as Sophia. She ducked behind a centrifuge, praying he wouldn't recognize her. Parker, oblivious, engaged with her colleagues, asking pointed questions about their latest frozen meal formulations. His knowledge was startling, specific, incisive, as if he'd memorized their project files overnight. Elise watched from her hiding spot, her heart pounding. He was different here, less the charming suitor, and more a predator sizing up his territory. Yet his ease with the team, praising a junior researcher's spice blend, suggesting a tweak to a sauce viscosity, hinted at a passion she hadn't expected. She cursed herself for noticing, her mind still tangled in the memory of that velvet box and his unnerving proposal. Parker's tour was cut short by a call from Ethan, his voice urgent. "Victor Grant's been at it again, sir. Another supplier contract smells like a kickback." Victor, a 20-year veteran, and Charles' old friend, had been a thorn in Parker's side since his return. The evidence was damning. Inflated invoices, cozy dinners with suppliers, and a suspiciously lavish beach house. Parker's jaw tightened. "Set a meeting with him, now." The confrontation took place in a stark conference room, the air thick with tension. Victor, a heavy-set man with a comb-over and a smug grin, leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "Parker, you're new here. Loyalty matters more than your fancy spreadsheets," he said, his tone patronizing. Parker slid a folder across the table, its contents detailing Victor's illicit dealings. "Loyalty doesn't cover fraud," he said, his voice cold as steel. "You're done, Victor. Clear your desk." Victor's face reddened, his chair scraping as he stood. "Your grandfather won't stand for this. I built this company with him." Parker didn't flinch. You bled it dry. Security will escort you out." As Victor stormed off, muttering threats, Parker felt the weight of his decision. He'd just declared war on the old guard, and Charles would not take kindly to it. That evening, Parker found himself summoned to Charles's Upper East Side penthouse, a museum of old money with Persian rugs and oil paintings. Charles, in a velvet smoking jacket, sat by a roaring fireplace, his eyes glinting with displeasure. "You humiliated me today," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Skipping the ceremony, firing Victor without consulting me. This isn't how we do things." Parker stood tall, unyielding. "Things need to change, grandfather. We're losing ground to competitors because of men like Victor. I'm here to save this company, not coddle egos." Charles's cane tapped the floor, a warning. "You're too brash, Parker. You think you know better than those who came before you?" The accusation stung, but Parker held his ground. "I know numbers don't lie, and neither does corruption." The argument escalated, Charles's voice rising. "You're not just running a business. You're carrying a legacy. Act like it." Parker's temper flared, but he caught himself, remembering the blind date that had shaken him. "Maybe legacy means breaking the mold, not preserving it," he said, turning to leave. Charles called after him. "You'll need allies, Parker, and a wife. I've arranged another date for tomorrow. Don't disappoint me again." Back at his sleek Tribeca loft, Parker poured himself a bourbon, the city's lights glittering through his windows. Charles's insistence on marriage was a distraction, but the memory of Sophia lingered. Her brazen act, her quick retreat. He'd sensed a spark of authenticity beneath her facade, something that made his calculated world feel alive. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the guest list from Le Jardin. Sophia Bennett, heiress, was real, but her behavior didn't match the polished socialite he'd researched. Who was she, really? Meanwhile, across town in her modest Brooklyn apartment, Elise paced, her mind a storm. Sophia had laughed off the proposal story, tossing her another $200 for extra drama. But Elise felt unsettled. Parker Hamilton wasn't just a rich mark, he was her boss, and she'd unwittingly caught his attention. Her phone buzzed with a text from Liam Carter, her unrequited crush, asking if she'd enjoyed the concert tickets. Her heart sank. Another reminder of his obliviousness. She typed a curt reply, then deleted it, exhaustion overtaking her. As Parker stared at the city skyline, he made a decision. He'd find Sophia again, not just to unravel her mystery, but to prove to himself that he could trust his instincts. At Hamilton Foods, he'd wage his corporate revolution, cutting out the dead weight and building something new. But in his personal life, a different battle loomed, one that might require more than strategy. Elise, tossing in her sleep, dreamed of blue eyes and a diamond ring, unaware that her world was about to collide with his again. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights filled the Hamilton Foods research lab as Elise Warner meticulously pipetted a spice emulsion, her blonde curls tucked under a hairnet. Her hands moved with precision, but her mind was a storm, replaying Parker Hamilton's piercing gaze and that absurd diamond ring from their chaotic blind date. She'd dodged a bullet, slipping out of Le Jardin before he could unravel her deception, but his unexpected appearance in the lab yesterday had rattled her. As the new CEO, Parker was a force, sharp, commanding, and far too perceptive. Elise shook off the thought, focusing on her work. She couldn't afford distractions, not when her heart was already tangled in a different knot. Liam Carter, her friend of 7 years, who remained blissfully unaware of her feelings. Across town, Parker strode through the glass corridors of Hamilton Foods headquarters, his jaw set. The fallout from firing Victor Grant still echoed, whispers of disloyalty from the old guard, a terse warning from his grandfather Charles about respecting legacy. But Parker's resolve hadn't wavered. He'd spent the night poring over company records, uncovering more of Victor's shady deals. And now, he was laser-focused on rooting out inefficiencies. Yet, a corner of his mind lingered on Sophia Bennett, her bold facade, and the fleeting vulnerability he'd glimpsed as she fled. Charles's insistence on another blind date tonight felt like a leash, but Parker had a different plan. Find the real Sophia and uncover her game. Elise's day blurred into a rhythm of lab work, testing flavor profiles, logging data, until her phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Dinner tonight? Got a surprise for your birthday." Her heart leapt. Liam, with his easy smile and tousled brown hair, had been her anchor since college, their friendship a constant through her chaotic life. She'd loved him quietly, fiercely, for years, hoping one day he'd see her as more. The promise of a surprise sent a flutter through her chest, but she tempered it with caution. Liam's gestures were often sweet, but platonic, and she couldn't bear another letdown. At dusk, Elise arrived at a cozy diner in Brooklyn, its neon sign casting a warm glow. Liam waved her over, his grin infectious as he slid a small gift bag across the table. "Happy birthday, Elise," he said, his eyes bright. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing 2 concert tickets to see her favorite indie band. Her smile faltered. The tickets were for a shared experience, not a romantic gesture. "Thought we could go together," Liam added, oblivious to the shadow crossing her face. "Best friends, right?" Elise forced a nod, her throat tight, the word friends, a knife twisting in her chest. Meanwhile, Parker sat in a dimly lit lounge, the second blind date Charles had arranged. The woman across from him, a poised brunette named Victoria, droned on about her charity galas, her voice a polished monotone. Parker's mind wandered, comparing her to the enigmatic Sophia. Victoria was exactly the kind of match Charles wanted, refined, predictable. But she lacked the spark that had kept him awake last night. He excused himself early, citing a work emergency, and stepped into the cool night air. Charles's pressure to marry was suffocating, but Parker suspected it was more than tradition. His grandfather's pointed comments about Ethan Brooks, his loyal secretary, hinted at a deeper concern. Charles seemed convinced Parker was hiding a relationship, and the blind dates were a test to prove otherwise. Back at the diner, Elise pushed her fries around her plate, Liam's chatter about his new photography project fading into background noise. She wanted to confess, to tell him how her heart raced every time he smiled, but the fear of ruining their friendship stopped her. As Liam paid the bill, he mentioned Ethan, his friend from a photography class, who worked at Hamilton Foods. "He's got this intense boss. Some CEO hotshot," Liam said, laughing. Elise's fork froze midair. "Parker Hamilton?" she asked, her voice tight. Liam nodded, oblivious to her panic. The coincidence felt like a trap, the universe tightening its grip. Parker, driving through Manhattan, couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia was more than a spoiled heiress. He'd run a background check on Sophia Bennett, finding a socialite with a penthouse and a penchant for parties. But the woman he'd met didn't fit. Her eyes had held a sharpness, a hint of something real beneath the act. He called Ethan, his voice clipped. "Find out if Sophia Bennett has any recent aliases or stand-ins. I want answers by morning." Ethan, ever efficient, promised to dig deeper, unaware that his own life was about to intertwine with Elise's world through Sophia. Elise left the diner, the concert tickets heavy in her bag. She walked the Brooklyn streets, the city's pulse matching her restless energy. Liam's easy affection had once been enough, but tonight it felt like a cage. Her thoughts drifted to Parker, his audacious proposal, his unshakable calm. She hated how he'd gotten under her skin, how his presence in the lab had made her feel exposed. She was a scientist, not a femme fatale, Yet she'd played the part too well, and now she was caught in her web. At Hamilton Foods, Parker stood alone in his office, the city skyline a glittering backdrop. He opened his laptop, pulling up employee records on a whim. Scrolling through the research department, he paused on a photo. Elise Warner, blonde, green-eyed, her face devoid of the garish makeup Sophia had worn. A hunch stirred, but he dismissed it. She was just a researcher, not the whirlwind who'd upended his night. Still, he made a note to watch her, sensing the threads of fate pulling tighter. Elise, back in her apartment, tossed the tickets onto her nightstand. She stared at her reflection, the blonde curls framing a face that felt like a stranger's. Tomorrow, she'd face the lab again, praying Parker hadn't connected the dots. But as she drifted to sleep, her dreams were a tangle of Liam's smile and Parker's piercing gaze. A collision of longing and danger that promised to unravel her carefully ordered world. Elise Warner's heart raced as she stepped into the gilded lobby of the Azure Room, a rooftop restaurant overlooking Manhattan's twinkling skyline. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and wealth, chandeliers casting prisms across velvet drapes. She adjusted the sapphire blue dress Sophia Bennett had thrust upon her, its plunging neckline and shimmering fabric, a far cry from her usual lab coat. Her blonde curls were swept into an elegant updo, but beneath the glamour, Elise felt like a fraud. Sophia had called her that morning, voice bubbling with desperation, and a $600 offer. Attend another blind date as her proxy to scare off another suitor. Elise had hesitated, the memory of Parker Hamilton's unsettling proposal still burning, but the cash and Sophia's pleading won out. Be extra insufferable, Sophia had urged. Elise steeled herself, ready to play the part of a spoiled heiress again, unaware that fate was about to tighten its grip. Parker Hamilton sat at a candlelit table by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tailored charcoal suit accentuating his commanding presence. The city sprawled below, a glittering testament to his ambition, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His grandfather, Charles's insistence on blind dates was a relentless pressure, fueled by suspicions about his relationship with Ethan Brooks, his steadfast secretary. Parker had tasked Ethan with digging into Sophia Bennett's background, but the results were inconclusive. Her socialite persona didn't match the fire he'd seen at Le Jardin. Tonight's date was another of Charles's setups, and Parker braced for boredom, expecting another polished debutante. Instead, as the hostess ushered in a familiar figure in blue, his pulse quickened. It was her, the same blonde, the same audacious spark, masquerading as Sophia again. Elise froze when she saw him, her green eyes widening behind her borrowed designer sunglasses. Parker Hamilton, her CEO, was the suitor. The coincidence was a cruel twist, and panic clawed at her chest. She couldn't back out now. Sophia was counting on her, and the money was already half spent on rent. Swallowing hard, she plastered on a dazzling smile and sauntered over, her heels clicking like a countdown. Well, Parker Hamilton. Back for more, she purred, sliding into the seat across from him. Didn't get enough of me last time. Parker's lips curved into a half smile, his blue eyes glinting with recognition. Sophia, you're full of surprises, he said, his voice smooth, but laced with suspicion. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. His gaze raked over her, noting the same exaggerated flair. The way she tossed her hair, the ostentatious twirl of a diamond-encrusted bracelet. But there was something else, a flicker of unease in her eyes that betrayed her act. Elise launched into her performance, determined to make him bolt. Oh, darling, I'm a whirlwind you can't resist, she said, leaning forward to flash a coy smile. I was just at Bergdorf's today. Dropped 10 grand on a handbag. Worth it, don't you think? She dangled the bag, a limited edition clutch, letting it catch the light. Parker's expression remained infuriatingly calm, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Undeterred, she escalated, her voice dripping with faux seduction. "You know, I'm thinking we skip the small talk. How about we head to the Four Seasons? I hear their sweets are divine." She expected shock, maybe disgust, but Parker leaned back, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Tempting," he said, his tone low, almost teasing. "But I'm starting to think you're trying too hard to scare me off." Elisa's smile faltered, her heart thudding. He was too sharp, too unshakable. Before she could recover, a woman stormed toward their table, her face twisted with fury. "Sophia Bennett, you shameless hussy!" she shrieked, drawing every eye in the restaurant. "You were with my boyfriend last week and now you're here with him?" She jabbed a manicured finger at Parker, who looked unfazed. Elisa's mind reeled. The woman, clearly mistaking her for Sophia, was unraveling her plan. I think you've got the wrong person," she stammered. But the woman wasn't listening, her voice rising as she recounted a litany of Sophia's supposed sins. Diners whispered. Phones subtly raised to capture the drama. Elise felt the walls closing in, her carefully crafted persona crumbling under the spotlight. Parker stood, his presence commanding silence. "Ma'am, you're mistaken," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is a private dinner, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave." His tone left no room for argument, and the woman hesitated, her bravado faltering. With a huff, she stormed off, leaving a wake of murmurs. Elise sat frozen, her cheeks burning, the weight of every stare suffocating. Parker turned to her, his expression softening. "You okay?" She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Just didn't expect that," she mumbled, clutching Sophia's bag like a lifeline. Parker signaled the waiter, paid the bill, and offered his arm. "Let's get out of here," he said, guiding her through the crowd to the rooftop terrace. The night air was crisp, the city's lights a dazzling distraction. Elise leaned against the railing, catching her breath, the weight of her deception heavier than ever. "Why do I get the feeling you're not who you say you are?" Parker asked, his voice low, almost gentle. He stood close, his warmth cutting through the chill. Elise's pulse raced, her mind scrambling for a lie. "I'm Sophia," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Parker studied her, his gaze piercing, as if he could see the scientist beneath the sequins. "You're a terrible liar," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "But I'm curious. Whoever you are, you've got my attention." He stepped closer, his breath brushing her cheek. "Let's do this again, properly. No games." Elise's heart pounded, torn between fear and a dangerous thrill. She'd come to sabotage a date, but Parker Hamilton was rewriting the rules, pulling her into a game she wasn't sure she could win. As she murmured a vague excuse and fled to the elevator, his parting words echoed in her ears. "I'll find you, Sophia, or whoever you are." Back in her Brooklyn apartment, Elise kicked off her heels, the sapphire dress pooling on the floor. Sophia's giddy texts about the perfect disaster barely registered. Elise's thoughts were on Parker, his unshakable calm, his protective instinct, and the way he'd seen through her. Tomorrow, she'd face the lab again, praying he hadn't connected her to Sophia. But as she stared at the concert tickets from Liam, still untouched on her nightstand, she felt a shift. The lines between her quiet life and this dangerous masquerade were blurring, and Parker Hamilton was at the center of it all. Elise Warner's fingers trembled as she swiped her employee ID at the Hamilton Foods Research Lab, the beep echoing like a warning in the sterile hallway. The memory of Parker Hamilton's parting words on the rooftop of the Azure Room. "I'll find you, Sophia, or whoever you are," clung to her like a shadow. Her blonde curls were tucked under a hairnet, her face bare of the glamorous makeup she'd worn as Sophia Bennett, but she felt exposed. Parker, the new CEO, was no longer just a fleeting blind date disaster. He was her boss, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to see through her every disguise. She busied herself with a flavor profile analysis, praying he'd stay on the 42nd floor, far from her lab. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Parker, meanwhile, sat in his sleek office, the Manhattan skyline a glittering distraction beyond the glass. His desk was littered with reports, but his mind was on the enigmatic woman who'd twice upended his world. Ethan Brooks, his secretary, had found little on Sophia Bennett beyond her socialite persona. Yet Parker's instincts screamed she was a facade. The way she'd faltered under scrutiny, the raw panic in her eyes, it was too real for a spoiled heiress. His grandfather Charles's relentless push for blind dates, fueled by suspicions about Ethan, only sharpened Parker's resolve to uncover the truth. He glanced at the employee records on his screen, Elise Warner's photo staring back. A hunch nagged at him, but he pushed it aside, focusing on a more immediate threat. Another board meeting where the old guard would challenge his reforms. Elise's day was a blur of lab work until a text from Sophia lit up her phone. Another date, $1,200. Make him hate you, please. Elise groaned, her bank account whispering temptation. She was about to decline when she dropped her ID badge, the plastic clattering on the lab floor. Before she could grab it, a polished shoe stepped into view. Parker Hamilton stood over her, his suit impeccable, his expression unreadable as he picked up the card. Elise Warner, he read, his voice low, testing. Research scientist. Impressive work on the new spice blend. He handed it back, his fingers brushing hers, sending a jolt through her. His eyes lingered, searching, and she froze, certain he'd connected her to Sophia. Thanks, she mumbled, tucking the badge away, her heart hammering. Parker lingered, asking about her project with a disarming curiosity that made her stammer. When he finally left, she exhaled, vowing to avoid Sophia's schemes. But that evening, Sophia showed up at her Brooklyn apartment, waving a check. Double the pay, Elise. One more date. He's relentless. Against her better judgment, Elise agreed, slipping into another of Sophia's dresses, a crimson number that screamed trouble. The date was at the Gilded Cage, a jazz club with smoky air and velvet booths. Elise, as Sophia, strutted in, her act dialed up, giggling about designer shoes, twirling a martini glass. Parker was already there, his presence magnetic, his smile dangerous. You're persistent, she teased, expecting him to recoil. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice a velvet challenge. And you're a mystery I'm determined to solve. Her bravado wavered as he matched her energy, unfazed by her tales of lavish spending and flirtatious innuendos. When she suggested a hotel to push him away, he countered with a grin. Only if you say yes to my proposal first. Her laughter was forced, her pulse racing. She was losing control of the game. The night took a chaotic turn when Parker's phone buzzed with a call from Charles, demanding that he meet another suitor tomorrow. Frustrated, Parker turned to Elise, his eyes intense. I'm tired of my grandfather's games. Play along with me, Sophia. Be my girlfriend, just for show, to shut him up. I'll pay you double what she's offering. Elise's jaw dropped. The money was tempting, but the risk was staggering. Before she could refuse, a drunk patron stumbled into their booth, spilling wine on her dress. In the chaos, Parker pulled her close, shielding her, his hand steady on her arm. The sudden proximity sent her heart into overdrive and she blurted, "Fine, I'll do it." They retreated to a quiet corner to hash out the deal. Parker handed her a contract, $2,400 to pose as his girlfriend for a month, complete with a backstory. They met at a charity gala, bonded over art, no mention of blind dates. Elise hesitated, the weight of her deception crushing, but the money and his earnest plea, "I need this, and I think you do too," sealed it. As they shook hands, a jazz saxophone wailed, and their fingers lingered, the air electric. Then, in a moment of reckless impulse, Elise tripped over a chair, falling into Parker's arms. Their faces were inches apart, and before she could pull away, he kissed her. A fleeting, searing moment that left her breathless. She jerked back, her cheeks flaming. "That wasn't part of the deal," she snapped, but her voice trembled. Parker's eyes darkened, a mix of surprise and something deeper. "It wasn't," he agreed, his voice low. "But I'm not sorry." Elise fled to the restroom, splashing water on her face, her reflection a stranger's. She was Elise Warner, not Sophia, yet that kiss had felt real, dangerous. She couldn't tell if it was part of his game or something more. Back at the table, Parker was composed, but his mind raced. The kiss had been impulsive, sparked by her fire and the vulnerability she couldn't hide. He knew she wasn't Sophia, but he didn't care. He wanted to know her. As they parted, he slipped her his card. "For the contract," he said, but his eyes said more. Elise nodded, clutching the card, her world tilting. In her apartment, Elise stared at the contract, the kiss replaying in her mind. Sophia's giddy texts about the perfect chaos felt hollow. Across town, Parker sat in his loft, the city's pulse matching his own. He'd meant to keep it professional, but that kiss had cracked his armor. Tomorrow he'd push forward with his corporate reforms. But tonight, he was haunted by a woman who was both a stranger and the key to something he couldn't name. Elise Warner's heart thrummed like the bass line pulsing through the crowded Brooklyn venue, the air thick with sweat and anticipation. The indie band's guitars wailed, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the stolen kiss with Parker Hamilton at the Gilded Cage. The contract to pose as his girlfriend for a month, signed in a haze of panic and temptation, weighed heavily in her bag, alongside the concert tickets from Liam Carter. She'd come tonight to escape, to lose herself in music with Liam, her unrequited love of 7 years. But the memory of Parker's lips, unexpected, searing, lingered like a bruise. As she adjusted her denim jacket, her blonde curls loose under the dim lights, she scanned the crowd for Liam, praying the night would ground her. Across the city, Parker Hamilton navigated the sleek corridors of Hamilton Foods headquarters, his mind a battlefield. The kiss with Sophia had cracked his carefully constructed walls, and her quick retreat only fueled his need to unravel her. He'd spent the morning grilling Ethan Brooks, his secretary, for updates on Sophia Bennett's background. But the trail was cold, too cold. Meanwhile, his grandfather Charles's pressure to marry intensified, each blind date a reminder of his scrutiny over Parker's rumored closeness with Ethan. But tonight, Parker was focused on a different crisis. A whistleblower's tip about a corporate spy leaking trade secrets to a rival. He needed to act fast, but a nagging thought pulled him back to the mysterious blonde who'd signed his contract. At the concert, Elise found Liam near the stage, his easy grin cutting through the crowd. "You made it," he shouted over the music, handing her a beer. Her heart ached at his warmth, so familiar yet so out of reach. As the band played a soulful ballad, Liam leaned close, his voice soft. "I wrote something for the dedication tonight. For you." Elise's breath caught, hope flaring despite herself. When the lead singer paused to read a fan letter, the words hit like a spotlight. "To Elise, my best friend, who's been there through everything. 7 years of laughter and late nights. Here's to you." The crowd cheered, but Elise's smile froze. Best friend. The phrase was a dagger, exposing her unrequited love to the world. Her eyes stung, and she turned away, only to lock gazes with Parker Hamilton, standing inexplicably at the bar, his blue eyes piercing through the haze. Parker hadn't planned to be here. He'd followed a lead on the corporate spy to a nearby meeting, only to detour when Ethan mentioned a concert linked to a Hamilton Foods employee. Seeing Elise, not Sophia, on the verge of tears, her vulnerability raw, stirred something in him. He approached, his voice cutting through the music. "Didn't expect to find you here," he said, his tone gentle but probing. Elise stiffened, wiping her eyes. "Just enjoying the show," she lied, her voice brittle. Parker's gaze softened, reading her pain. "That dedication, it meant a lot to you, didn't it?" he asked, stepping closer. Elise nodded, unable to speak, her heart laid bare. "Sometimes," Parker said, his voice low, "the people we want don't see us. But that doesn't mean you're invisible." His words, raw and unguarded, echoed his guarded past, and for a moment they stood as equals, two souls caught in unspoken longing. The moment was shattered when Elise's phone buzzed with a frantic text from Sophia. "Help! Creepy guy followed me from a bar. At my place, call me." Panic surged, and Elise bolted, mumbling an excuse to Parker. He followed, sensing her distress, and insisted on driving her to Sophia's Upper East Side penthouse. The city blurred past as Elise dialed Sophia, her friend's voice shaky but safe, locked in her apartment. "He's outside, banging on the door," Sophia whispered. Parker's jaw tightened as he sped through traffic, his calm exterior masking a growing fury. "Stay on the line," he told Elise, his voice steady. "We're almost there." At Sophia's building, they found a disheveled man lurking in the lobby, his eyes wild. Parker confronted him, his presence commanding. "Leave now or I'll call the police," he said, his tone ice-cold. The man scoffed but backed off when Parker stepped forward, his authority undeniable. Upstairs, Sophia flung open her door, tear-streaked but unharmed. "He recorded me," she stammered, showing a grainy video from her building's security, a voyeuristic clip of her changing. Elise's stomach churned, but Parker was already on his phone, contacting his legal team. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice a vow. "I'll have my people trace him, press charges, and shut this down." His decisiveness stunned Elise, her admiration mingling with guilt over her deception. As Sophia calmed down, Elise and Parker stepped into the hallway, the tension between them electric. "You didn't have to do that," Elise said, her voice soft. Parker's eyes met hers, intense but warm. "I don't stand by when someone's in trouble," he said. "Not Sophia, and not you." The weight of his words, coupled with his actions, cracked Elise's resolve. She was still Sophia to him, bound by a contract, but his care felt real, dangerously so. "Thank you," she whispered, her heart torn between gratitude and the lie she couldn't escape. Back at her apartment, Elise stared at the contract, the $2,400 a chain linking her to Parker. Sophia's safety, Parker's heroism, and the raw connection at the concert swirled in her mind. Across town, Parker sat in his loft, the city's lights dim compared to the fire Elise had ignited. He'd protect her, contract or not, but the truth of her identity loomed. Tomorrow he'd push harder to uncover it, unaware that their next encounter would test them both. The fluorescent lights of Hamilton Foods Research Lab buzzed like a swarm of accusations as Elise Warner hunched over a petri dish, her blonde curls escaping their hairnet. The sting of Parker Hamilton's protective fury at Sophia Bennett's penthouse, coupled with the raw empathy he'd shown at the concert, had left her reeling. Their stolen kiss at the Gilded Cage, a reckless spark in their fake girlfriend contract, burned in her memory, making her question everything. She was Elise, a scientist, not Sophia, the flamboyant heiress. Yet the lines between her roles were blurring. The lab, once her haven, now felt like a stage where every glance from her colleagues carried a whisper of doubt. She gripped her clipboard, determined to focus, but the weight of her double life pressed harder, threatening to crack her resolve. On the 42nd floor, Parker Hamilton stood before his office's glass wall, Manhattan's skyline a jagged reflection of his turmoil. The corporate spy case was resolved. The voyeur was facing charges, thanks to his legal team's swift action. But the victory felt hollow. Elise, or Sophia, consumed his thoughts. Her vulnerability at the concert, her fierce loyalty to her friend, had dismantled his defenses, and the kiss had ignited something he couldn't ignore. His grandfather Charles's relentless matchmaking, driven by suspicions about his secretary Ethan Brooks, was a distraction he could ill afford. But worse were the rumors swirling through the company, whispers that his leadership favored an unnamed employee. Parker's jaw clenched as he called Ethan. "Get me the source of these rumors," he ordered, his voice sharp, "and pull Elise Warner's latest project reports." In the lab, Elise's morning was shattered when her colleague Tara slipped her a phone, open to a company-wide email thread. "Is the new R&D lead getting special treatment from the CEO?" it read, followed by snide comments about her rapid rise. Elise's face burned. Her work on a breakthrough vegan meal line had earned her a lead role, but now it was tainted by insinuations of favoritism. She'd poured years into perfecting recipes, staying late to tweak formulations, yet the gossip reduced her to a scandal. "It's not true," she muttered to Tara, who offered a sympathetic nod, but no words. The break room was worse. Colleagues whispered behind coffee mugs, their eyes darting away when she entered. Elise's heart sank. The contract with Parker, meant to be a secret, had become a noose. Parker faced his storm in a boardroom thick with tension. The board, still bristling from his firing of Victor Grant, pounced on the rumors. "Your entanglements are a liability," board member Harold Vance said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Favoring a junior employee undermines your credibility." Parker's hands fisted under the table, his mind flashing to Elise's tear-streaked face at the concert. "My decisions are data-driven," he countered, his tone icy. "If you're questioning my integrity, bring proof." Charles, at the head, tapped his cane, his eyes narrowing. "Keep your focus, Parker. The company comes first, not some fleeting dalliance." The words stung, but Parker held his ground, knowing the truth was more complicated. Elise's resolve crumbled that afternoon. During a team meeting, she presented a new spice blend, but her colleagues' sidelong glances and muted responses cut deeper than any critique. A text from Sophia arrived, oblivious to the chaos. "Another date tonight, $600 to keep Parker busy." Elise's anger flared. She was done with the charade. Back at her desk, she opened her laptop, drafting a resignation letter. "Effective immediately, I resign due to an untenable work environment." Her fingers hovered over the send button, her heart heavy. She'd built her career on grit, not games, but the gossip had stripped her of that. As she printed the letter, a colleague's whisper floated over. "She's probably got the CEO wrapped around her finger." Elise slammed her pen down, tears pricking her eyes. Parker, exiting the boardroom, caught sight of Elise in the hallway, her face pale, a piece of paper clutched in her hand. He moved toward her, but Ethan intercepted with a report. The rumors started with an anonymous tip, likely from Victor's allies. "And Elise Warner's projects. She's outperformed everyone." Parker's hunch solidified. She was Sophia, and the gossip was a vendetta. He called her name, but she ducked into the elevator, her eyes avoiding his. Determined, he took the stairs, reaching the lobby as she exited. "Elise, wait!" he called, his voice urgent. She froze, the letter trembling in her hand. "Why are you running?" Parker asked, stepping closer, his blue eyes searching hers. Elise's voice shook. "The rumors, they're ruining me. I can't stay where I'm not respected. Parker's expression softened, guilt flickering. You're the best researcher we have. Don't let gossip win. Elise laughed bitterly, holding up the letter. It's not just gossip, it's this lie. Sophia, the contract, all of it. Parker's breath caught, her admission confirming his suspicions. I knew you weren't her, he said, his voice low. But I don't care. Stay, Elise, we'll fix this. She shook her head, tears falling. I can't. I don't know what's real anymore. She turned, leaving the letter on a nearby table, and walked into the evening rain. Parker stood frozen, the paper dampening under the sprinklers. Her words a wound. He'd let her slip away, too caught in his own fears to fight for her. In her Brooklyn apartment, Elise curled up, the resignation sent via email, her heart aching. Across town, Parker sat in his loft, the city's lights dim. He'd lost more than an employee. He'd lost the woman who'd made him feel alive. Tomorrow he'd face another of Charles's blind dates, but his heart was with Elise, and he vowed to win her back, no matter the cost. Elise Warner's heart thundered as she stood at JFK Airport, her suitcase clutched tightly, the resignation letter crumpled in her pocket. The gossip at Hamilton Foods had driven her to the edge, and the voicemail from Parker Hamilton, Sophia, or whoever you are, we need to talk, had pushed her over it. She'd convinced herself that quitting was her only escape from the web of lies she'd spun as Sophia Bennett and the dangerous pull of Parker's gaze. But a tabloid headline, glimpsed on her phone, changed everything. Millionaire CEO Parker Hamilton caught with Canadian starlet. The grainy photo showed him with a woman in Toronto, and though Elise's mind screamed it was a lie, her heart faltered. She'd booked a red-eye flight to Canada, determined to confront him, to end the charade and her unspoken feelings once and for all. Now, as she boarded the plane, the weight of her decision pressed against her chest, a mix of fear and resolve. In Toronto, Parker paced the sterile halls of St. Michael's Hospital, where his grandfather Charles was recovering from a heart procedure. The past year had been a crucible, leading Hamilton Foods from afar, battling Charles's disapproval of his relationship with Elise, and fighting the ache of her absence. He'd known about the rumors at the company, the whispers that had cost Elise her projects, but he'd been powerless to stop them from Canada. The tabloid story, a baseless smear linking him to a starlet he'd met once at a charity event, was the final straw. He'd called Elise repeatedly, but her phone was off, and Ethan Brooks, his ever-reliable secretary, had no news of her. Parker's hand tightened around his phone, his blue eyes stormy. He needed her, not as Sophia, not as a contract, but as the woman who'd cracked his guarded heart. Elise's plane landed at dawn, the Toronto skyline sharp against a pale sky. She hailed a cab, her blonde curls disheveled, her eyes burning with exhaustion and determination. The hospital loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting her resolve. She marched to the reception desk, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. I'm here for Parker Hamilton. The nurse pointed her to a private wing, and Elise's steps faltered as she spotted him through a glass door, his suit rumpled, his face etched with worry. Before she could speak, Charles appeared, his cane tapping sharply. You, he said, his voice cold. Why are you here? To cause more trouble? Elise's breath caught, the sting of his disapproval sharp. I need to see Parker, she said, standing tall. It's personal. Charles's eyes narrowed, but before he could retort, Parker turned, his gaze locking onto hers. Time slowed, the hospital's hum fading as he crossed the room in long strides. Elise, he said, his voice raw, a mix of relief and urgency. What are you doing here? She held up her phone, the tabloid headline glaring. This? Is it true? Her voice trembled, betraying the hurt she'd tried to bury. Parker's face darkened, his hand reaching for hers. "It's a lie," he said, his tone fierce. "I've been here with my grandfather for months. I haven't looked at anyone else." He stepped closer, his warmth cutting through the sterile air. "I've been calling you. Why did you run?" Elise's throat tightened, the resignation letter burning in her pocket. "The rumors at work, they broke me," she admitted, her green eyes glistening. "I thought resigning was the only way out. And then I saw that headline and She stopped, her voice breaking. "I had to know if I was wrong about you." Parker's hand cupped her face, his touch gentle but firm. "You're not wrong," he said. "I love you, Elise. Not Sophia, not the contract. You." The confession hit like a tidal wave, washing away her doubts. Tears spilled as she leaned into his touch, the hospital fading around them. "I love you too," she whispered, the words freeing her from the weight of her lies. Parker pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both desperate and tender, a promise sealed in the chaos of their journey. Charles cleared his throat, his expression softening despite himself. "Well," he said gruffly, "if you're done causing a scene, maybe you're not the worst choice." Weeks later, New York's Central Park bloomed with spring, cherry blossoms drifting like confetti. Elise stood in a flowing ivory gown, her blonde curls adorned with tiny flowers, her heart pounding as she faced Parker. Their wedding was a whirlwind of joyful chaos. Parker forgot the rings in the car. Elise tripped on her train but laughed it off. And a rescue dog they'd adopted, named Chaos, fittingly, trotted down the aisle with a bow tie, stealing the show. Charles, now fully recovered, sat in the front row, his stern face breaking into a rare smile as he watched his grandson, transformed by love, vow to cherish Elise forever. "Do you, Parker, promise to love Elise, even when she reorganizes your office without asking?" the officiant teased, drawing laughter. Parker grinned, his blue eyes locked on hers. "I promise to love her chaos and all." Elise, her voice steady, vowed, "And I promise to love you, even when you're a stubborn CEO who hates my coffee." The crowd erupted in cheers as they kissed, Chaos barking gleefully, rose petals swirling around them. That evening, at the reception in a candlelit ballroom, Elise and Parker danced, the city's lights twinkling through the windows. Hamilton Foods had soared under their partnership, Elise's innovative recipes complementing Parker's vision. Charles, raising a glass, toasted, "To Elise, who reminded us that legacy thrives on change." Sophia, radiant beside Ethan, her new beau, winked at Elise, her gratitude unspoken but clear. As they swayed, Parker whispered, "You turned my world upside down, Elise Warner." She smiled, her heart full. "And you made mine worth the chaos." Their laughter mingled with the music, a testament to a love born from deception but forged in truth, ready to face whatever storms lay ahead. Thank you for joining Elise and Parker's whirlwind journey from deception to love in a game of hearts. We hope their chaotic romance and heartfelt vows left you smiling. Please share your thoughts. Rate the story from 0 to 10. Tell us your favorite moment, and let us know your city in the comments. Until next time, stay tuned for more tales of passion and surprises.